Assalamu alaikum everyone. I am Tooba Towfiq and you're watching Kashmir Observer. In 1955, at the peak of Cold War, Russia made its first official trip to India. The Soviet minister Nikita Khrushchev visited Srinagar, and this visit set the tone for India-Russia relations for years to come. He is famously known to have said to India in Srinagar that we're so close to you that should you call out our names from the mountain tops, we are going to appear at your side. Decades on, in the context of the Russia Ukraine war, things are changing. As both sides were gearing up for war, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan landed in Russia. This marked the very first visit of a Pakistani premier to Moscow in 23 years. India, on the other end, has been abstaining to vote on matters related to Russia-Ukraine war in the UN. We also have China as the all-weather ally of Pakistan, whose foreign minister was on a trip to New Delhi. Throw India's friendly relations with US in the mix and we have lots of geopolitical drama. With India in the midst of loyalties and a whirlwind of stirring allegiances, what is the status of South Asian geopolitics? This is going to be our topic of discussion for today, and we are lucky to have award-winning journalist BZ Khasru with us for the same.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Let's just get right into the discussion. So, why do you think Russia took such a gamble with Ukraine? I mean, what explains the escalation?
Thank you for having me. On the surface, everything seems clear-cut. Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting back. The fight is over land and power. But I would argue things are not as simple as people would see from the surface. And I would submit that this has happened because the US wants to have a regime change in Russia. And if we want to go back in history, then we can better explain what exactly is happening. So we need to go back to the time of the Bolshevik Revolution. And before the Bolshevik Revolution, Imperial Russia was part of an alliance, military alliance, along with the United States and Great Britain fighting against Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire during the First World War. The war went badly for Russia, and Russia was in chaos. At the time, Germany wanted to end the war with Russia and saw an opportunity. And Germany knew the Bolsheviks opposed the war, but the Bolshevik leaders, including Lenin, was in exile in Switzerland. So Germany allowed Lenin to come back home. Lenin eventually captured power. When Lenin captured power, he pulled out Imperial Russia out of war. United States and Britain didn't like that. On top, they supported the White Army against Lenin, and the White Army wanted to restore the Tsar and Imperial Russia. The Tsar would in turn rejoin the war. But that didn't happen because the White Army lost. And in the meantime, Lenin also announced that the Bolsheviks would export communism and wanted to destroy capitalism. So because of this announcement and what Lenin did by pulling out from the war, the West never forgave Russia and Lenin. So after that happened, in the meantime, Germany imposed an unequal treaty on Lenin. And under the treaty, Germany took land, including Ukraine, from Imperial Russia, from Lenin. Lenin was weak, he couldn't do anything against Germany. So in the meantime, the Allied powers, the United States and Britain, defeated Germany. And Lenin saw an opportunity. He attempted to recapture Ukraine. In the meantime, Ukraine declared independence, but they plunged into a civil war between Eastern Ukraine and Western Ukraine. And as we see today, Eastern Ukraine was allied with Russia and Western Ukraine was with the West. But Lenin eventually captured entire Ukraine and Ukraine became a part of the Soviet Union. So that is the first part of this background. Then comes what happened immediately before and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Before the collapse of the Soviet Union, during German reunification, the NATO promised that it would not be expanded to include the former Soviet republics. It would not go eastward. The NATO did not keep that promise. Then Putin came to power. Putin wanted to join NATO. Putin was officially told he had to wait in line behind those Baltic states and other applicants. Putin felt insulted. After all, Russia was a great power. Why should Russia wait in line behind tiny mini countries that didn't really matter? So that's what was Putin told. But in reality, that was not the real reason why Russia was not granted NATO membership. Basically, the West wanted Russia to be a liberal democracy like the United States or the Britain. And how did that happen? That happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union. There are two guys in the United States. One was Francis Fukuyama. He is a professor at Stanford University. He came up with the theory that because the US won the Cold War, the US system is superior. So the US can remake this world in its own image, exporting liberal democracy, as God created man in his own image. This is not what Fukuyama said, but I'm just adding, that's my way of saying. And in the meantime, he recommended the US should go slowly. But in the meantime, another guy came, Charles Krauthammer. He was a conservative columnist for the Washington Post. He wrote an article in Foreign Affairs magazine, and in that article, he said that because the US is the only superpower, it does not need to worry about what others say. It can do whatever it wants. So it should go ahead and just make the entire world look like liberal democracy, and they should export this democracy throughout the world. So based on these two theories, Washington crafted this policy. And to implement this policy, first Washington decided that it wanted to help China. Why should it help China? Because if China becomes wealthy, Chinese people would want democracy. And if China becomes democracy, then they won't fight against the West. They would live happily ever after along with the West. Well, China became wealthy, Chinese people were happy, but they felt that it was the Chinese Communist Party that helped the situation. So they did not want any Western democracy. They supported the Communist Party. And in the meantime, in Russia, Boris Yeltsin also experimented with liberal democracy. He created a mess in Russia. Russian people were very unhappy. They felt the Soviet Union was much better than Yeltsin's democracy. So when Putin came to power, they rallied around him because Putin restored the economic life. Putin also brought the country under control. Russian people loved that. And as a result of this, the US saw that now they needed to contain these two countries, but they cannot contain two of them at the same time. It will be too much to handle. So the US decided they would go one by one. And so they decided they should go to after the weaker one first. and that is Russia. So if they can get a regime change in Russia or get a weaker Russia, this Russia would not be able to come to China's help in the event US and China get into a confrontation. So that is the story behind this war. The US wants to control Russia, either making it a liberal democracy or making it weak and having a pro-West man in Moscow.
So, as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned, what do you think are going to be the effects of it on the geopolitics of South Asia?
I see three things emerging from this conflict if the conflict continues. If the conflict continues, there is a possibility China and Russia get closer. And if that happens, that may mean trouble for India. Right now, Russia is neutral on the India-China border issue. But if China comes to Russia's help in this war, I'm not sure Russia will be able to maintain that neutral position going forward. So that would be one big problem for India. The second problem would come from the Quad. If the war continues again, then the US will divert its attention to Europe and put the Quad on the back burner. And that will mean India will be less important to the US, and India will be looking for some other ways and how India would be able to deal with China. That will be another concern for India going forward. And then in the other country that will have a little bit of positive effect from this war will be Bangladesh. If this war continues and if the United States diverts its attention to Europe, Bangladesh will see a little bit less pressure to join the Quad, and it will give Bangladesh a breathing time to think about its future course of action and decide what to do. So these are the three possible things I see coming from this war if it continues.
So you said that you see Chinese and Russian interests converging and not competing in this scenario at the moment. What does it do to India-China relationships?
Again, Russia and China both see the United States as their number one enemy. They know if either one of them gets weaker, the US will take advantage of their weakness. So they have a vested interest in working together to face the US. And I think this thing will take shape and bring them closer. And if they get closer, how India will deal with them, and that will be a big issue because there may be an alliance coming up depending on how long the war continues, and that may stretch from Pakistan to North Korea. So there are many things that can happen we do not know at this point, but you are going to see this Russia-China alliance is going to have serious impact in global relationships.
So, I mean, in this schema, where does India lie? Do you see India tilting towards the US?
India has been going toward the US, but the problem India faces is India cannot fully trust the US. And that has a historical reason. Indians in general see the US as the other side of colonial Europe. Nehru, Krishna Menon, they saw it that way. And I think that residue is still there in the general population. So India is very cautious about how it should proceed with the US. And Russia is a time-tested friend, but Russia cannot give India what India needs. So that's why India is going to the US. But again, India is worried what will happen if one day China wants to cut a deal with the US and leaves India out in the cold. And given the history of the US, is not a reliable partner. India is worried about that. The other thing is, China still hopes that it would be able to make a deal with India, and if India goes completely into the US orbit, that possibility will be killed, and China may get more aggressive and even use Pakistan against India to stir up things. So there are many things India at this time has to grapple with, and I can bet India's foreign office is very busy right now.
So China and Pakistan are all weather friends, and now that Pakistan, China are cozying up in a way to Russia, what does it do to India-Pakistan relationships?
Again, this will depend on how the Russia-China alliance emerges. If this war continues and Russia and China get closer, Pakistan will get closer to both of them. Pakistan has been trying for the past 2 decades to win over Russia, but Russia is going slowly because of its commitment to India. But if, again, India goes into the US orbit and Russia may want to balance that by getting closer to Pakistan. And if Pakistan becomes a member of the Russia, China, Pakistan axis, then Pakistan will be re-energized and Pakistan will step up pressure on India on the Kashmir issue. And at that point, as I said earlier, if China and Russia get together and with Pakistan, at that point, I'm not sure Russia will support India anymore. That will be again problematic for India.
Historically, the US was with Pakistan on Kashmir and Russia was with India on that issue. How do you see that changing, and what do you think is the anticipated outcome of the shifting of alliances?
This traditional, I do not think that will change that much because as we explained, that things are changing. If the war stops pretty soon, then we would not see drastic changes in any of the policies. But it again it will depend on how long the war continues, how alliances evolve going forward, and Pakistan has already given up on the US. Pakistan has been looking for new partners for the past 20 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union since the end of the Cold War. So Pakistan relationship will depend again on how these alliances shape up. If Pakistan gets re-energized, then there will be tension with India, and there will be period of tension continuing in that entire region. So that's something India has to worry about.
So, we don't know the status of war at the moment. Is it going to escalate further? Do you think that, earlier on people were saying that it might go on to become like a third world war? Do you see that happening, or do you think that it's going to be more or less like, the Cold War situation?
Well, if you are thinking about, nobody knows how a war will end once it begins, but you can look back and see what happened in the past. If you want to see what happened during the World War, First, Second World War, we can see at least there are three ingredients to evolve into a world war. And that will be like militarism, nationalism, and imperialism. Militarism meaning there must be military alliances between countries in the opposite camps. And if we look at today's situation, we to some extent have that. In one side, we have the NATO. On the other side, we don't have a formal military alliance, but if we combine Russia and China, we see an alliance, and it can quickly evolve into a bigger alliance, bringing Pakistan and North Korea into the equation. So you have four nuclear power countries on one side. And on the other side, you have also nuclear power countries. So that military alliance is there. Then you have the other ingredient is nationalism. If you look at the First World War, one of the things that happened, Bosnia-Herzegovina did not want to stay with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They are nationalistic. They wanted to join Serbia. We have the same situation today in Ukraine. Ukraine does not want to join Russia. Ukraine wants to be with the West. So the nationalism part is still there. What is missing here is imperialism. Russia does not have global ambitions. Russia wants simply what Putin stated, a secured boundary, and that will mean a neutral Ukraine and demilitarized Ukraine. Despite all the chatterboxes in the West, I do not believe that Russia has any imperial design. It does not restore the Soviet Union or imperial Russia. Even if it wants, it cannot, because its partners, for example, China or India at this time, would not want to support a long-term war because that will damage the world economy, and neither China nor India wants to see that. So they would oppose any adventure, even if Putin wants to prolong the war. So the rest of the world also does not want to see the war continuing. In addition to that, I see the West, although the US wants to have a regime change in Moscow, but it knows if Putin feels that he is going to be defeated, he is going to push the nuclear button. So the US will not cross the red line. The US knows that very well. As far as the Ukrainians are concerned, they also know that they need to stop this war as quickly as possible, because if the war continues, Russia is going to destroy Ukraine. That is not in the interest of the Ukrainians. So all the parties you see involved in this war or watching the war, they all would want to see this war coming to an end. So I do not think that this war can turn into a world war.
So, when the recent escalations began, at that point, Imran Khan visited Russia. How do you see that development?
If Pakistan has been trying, at least since President Musharraf went to Russia and he gave an interview to Russian government newspaper Izvestia. And he told that newspaper that he would like to discuss with the Russian leaders why Pakistan cannot be closer to Russia. What happened? Pakistan has been isolated since the end of the Cold War. Pakistan fought since the 1950s. Pakistan had the aim to do something with Kashmir. Pakistan has not been able to achieve that goal. And when Cold War ended, Pakistan was left alone by the United States. It was branded as a terrorist state, and Pakistanis are very demoralized. They felt betrayed by the US. And because of that reason, Pakistan has been looking for new partners that can help it militarily, economically. It used to receive help from the Middle East, but the Middle East is also going back on Pakistan. So Pakistan needs new allies, and Pakistan has a solid friend, that is China. In the meantime, Imran Khan, like Musharraf, is trying to build a new relationship with Russia, and this is the quest that took Imran Khan to Russia, even though there may be some people inside the country, they may think Imran Khan made a mistake, but based on the experience Pakistan has, Imran Khan has decided that he will have better luck by aligning Pakistan with China and Russia in the event something happens. Of course, he did not know about Putin's plan to invade Ukraine at the time, but behind the scenes, his goal was to bring Russia to Pakistan's side so that Pakistan would have someone to support in the event of a travel anywhere. At least because of the relationship between India and Russia, Russia would be able to have some kind of impact in the event there's a dispute or a flare up between Pakistan and India. Right now, because Pakistan has only China, whatever China says, India is not going to pay attention to that. But if Russia says something, then India will think of that. So that's the reason Imran Khan is trying to have another friend who would have a sovereign influence on India.
So this changing of allegiances and this cozying up of Russia with Pakistan and the possible Russian, Chinese, and Pakistani axis forming, how do you see that impacting the Kashmir issue? Maybe diplomatically. Let's start with that.
A Kashmir issue, as far as the US is concerned, is not going to change much. But if India gets closer to the US, US will put less pressure on India to resolve this Kashmir issue, because the US will always think and has always thought about its own interest first, and that is international affairs, that is politics. So what happens to Kashmir, that is secondary to the US. US main goal is to have India to contain China. That is going to be US main goal of the US. But if the alliance changes, as I said before, between Russia, China, and Pakistan, then Pakistan is going to step up pressure on India on the Kashmir issue. And if Russia is aligned with China, it may not support India as it did before. And as I said earlier, Russia right now has a neutral position, and Russia wants to abide by the agreements like the Simla Agreement and the Lahore Understanding. This kind of thing Russia still wants to adhere to. But if there is a new alliance involving Pakistan, China, and Russia, then things will change dramatically, and Pakistan will start pushing India to resolve this Kashmir issue again.
Let's just conclude this very fruitful discussion, I must say. I would like you to comment on what you think is on cards next. Like, what do you think is on cards next?
Will come to an end quickly because I do not see anybody has any vested interest continuing this war, because this will bring only distraction and dislocation in international economy. It will have a it will kill a lot of people, and there will be no positive outcome other than the big countries fighting over this piece of land or their strategic goal. But at the end of the day, all wars will end at the negotiating table, and I think these powers will get to the negotiating table. Only issue here is if the US is going to decide pretty quickly that it should let Ukraine sit down with Russia and come to an agreement to end this war.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving us your time. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tooba.